Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first in a series of Women in Economics. Okay, so before we begin in earnest, I'm going to ask Mr. Thompson, who happens to be the chair of the School of Business, who happens to be the president of the union, and who also happens to be a pastor, to come up, please, and open us up in prayer and to welcome us officially. Mr. Thompson?
Let us bow our heads as we pray. We thank you, most eternal God, that we come to open this series of Women in Economics lecture. We pray, God, that you would give us understanding to open up our hearts to receive and appreciate what is presented. We ask that you would guide each expert who come here to speak on the various subject matters, and that you would prepare the hearts of our students in the audience, as well as those persons from the public in Facebook land, to receive and to be enriched and enlightened. We ask your blessings that you be forever present. In our midst we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Makati. I would like to say good evening to all of you students. I see some of my students are here from Stats 301 and Management 310. Could I hear a Ray? Okay, good. Okay, so welcome to this series, and also those of you in Facebook land listen online to this series of lecture, Women in Economics Lecture Series. And, I just find it's fortuitous that Makati introduced me in my various roles, and sometimes my roles, they conflict, sometimes they're conflated, but nonetheless, they always synergize. And so here I am today, after being proclaimed the proponent of, in defense of academic freedom and other things, and now today I come now to share in another very specific expression of the academic intelligence at the University of the Bahamas. And I'm excited to see that our first series starts with one of my colleagues and a professor in the School of Business. And we're excited for what the head of the department for the Economic Banking and Finance Department, Assistant Professor Dale Makati, brings her industry experience to the School of Business in leading this event, Women in Economics. And in fact, I'd like to challenge her, Ms. Makati, that, while we have a lot of emphasis at times on our women, please don't forget our men. Perhaps there's another time and another place, sometime so just a thought. But today, for this period, for this series of lecture, we are here to examine our women and their power in economics. The Banking and Economics and Finance Department at the University of the Bahamas, in the School of Business and the College of Business, will be hosting this event. And this is the inaugural event and our first meeting. And I'm excited to be a part of this initiative. And students, I challenge you, I encourage you to listen, learn, and prepare yourselves that one day in the future that you too may be a female economist, or for that matter, a male economist, who can contribute to economic thoughts, to the building of our nations. As we know, economists are the ones who supposed to be the greatest thinkers. And I speak so, one of my other hats, I am an agricultural economist by academics. And so the thing about economics is that it exposes you to, of course, it's the allocation of scarce resources, but it exposes to the whole item of how an economy works, its systems, its financial and economic systems, which is very important in every aspect of your life. That's why in the School of Business, in our Bachelor's of Business Administration, there are several micro as well as macroeconomic courses, and as well as some finances courses that all students are obligated to complete, because it is a part of girding you and preparing you to have the attributes so that you can contribute to your personal development and to national development. So I'd like to welcome all of you to come and experience the intellectual capacity of our University of the Bahamas. And I, as a proponent of academic freedom, I congratulate our first presenter, my colleague, a great woman. When you look at her resume, a great, I don't like to preempt it, but a great person who, and a good friend of mine, and a great economist in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Women in Economics lecture series. Enjoy and learn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Thompson. Indeed, we are most proud to have as our first presenter one of our very own. And coming to officially introduce Dr. Saunders is Mr. Roll, a senior student in the Economics and Finance Department. Mr. Roll, please. Following his presentation and his introduction, Dr. Saunders will then take the stage, where we're looking forward to a very exciting presentation. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I will be introducing the very accomplished Dr. Olivea Saunders. Dr. Olivea Saunders possesses 30-plus years of experience as an educator and experience in the financial services sector. Dr. Saunders is a professor of economics at the University of the Bahamas who specializes in economics and research. She is a strong advocate for alternative economy solutions, which has made significant contributions in various aspects of the institution's development. As dean, she held responsibility at different times for business, education, hospitality, nursing, and technology. Professor Saunders was the team leader for the University Transition Secretariat, which was tasked with the responsibility of designing the roadmap for the transition to the university. She is a consultant in the area of social economic development, where she has made significant contributions to the national development discourse. She is co-editor of the book, The Bahamas in the 21st Century. Her particular area of interest is in alternative economic systems that serve humanity. Her published book, Tomato Economics, Shifting Economies from Scarcity to Abundance, presents one such alternative. Professor Saunders has a strong history of national service, having served on committees such as the Bahamas Constitutional Reform Commission, the Bahamas Sport Fishing and Conservation Association, Civil Society Consulting Group of the Inter-American Development Bank Bahamas Office, and the Bahamas Entrepreneurial Venture Capital Fund. Dr. Olivea Saunders.
Thank you. That was a bit long, if not too long. Thank you all for coming, and I hope we will not have a boring evening. I know many of you are here for the couple points on the next exam, and that's one of the challenges we have in our economic system. Everything is an exchange. But nonetheless, I'm not going to be talking about that tonight. My presentation tonight is about the Bahamas, and the overarching thesis is that the Bahamas is an economic success. And I'd like you to know that this conclusion did not arise because the country has recorded the lowest unemployment rate in decades, i.e. 8.8% this year, the last published data. And I expect many of you are questioning my sanity when you look at the high public debt situation. However, in lauding the Bahamas' debt management strategy, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, stated in April this year, quote, already the country is experiencing more fiscal space for national priorities and growth. The Bahamas' debt has fallen to 90.66% of GDP in 2022, and a further 4% to 86.61% in 2023. The nation is targeting a debt to GDP ratio of 65% by 26-27 fiscal year, and is well on its way to achieving these targets, end quote. When you consider that at the end of 2022, Japan's debt to GDP ratio was 266%, Singapore's 128%, and the USA's 131%. The Bahamas is holding its own, even as, according to the Central Bank's Quarterly Statistical Digest, August this year, debt service transactions represent near 15% of total public expenditure. Further, the country has managed to sustain its dollar peg. This indicates judicious fiscal and monetary management over the years. Adam Tooze, in Foreign Policy magazine earlier this year, wrote, quote, the Bahamas is the truly exceptional case of post-colonial black majority rule. It has a winning combination of stable politics and high income. Indeed, it has the highest income of any black majority independent state in the world. Of the largest states in the Caribbean, it is the only one to have managed, since independence, to go without a bailout program from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. So the discussion tonight provides a truncated history of the development of the Bahamian economy. It is contended that the Bahamian economic success is the result of four overarching factors. The first is the country's fortuitous and fortunate geography. Second, its geopolitical positioning and historical relationships. Third is that it's followed a classical economic model by the Caribbean Nobel laureate Sir Arthur Lewis. And fourth, it is because it has adopted moderate, pragmatic economic policies. The country's geographic position, that is bordering the wealthiest and most powerful nation in the world, the US, bordering the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti, as well as the USA's nemesis, Cuba, has provided opportunities for beneficial economic activities. Immigrants from Haiti have provided the country with low-cost, unskilled, skilled workers, entrepreneurs, and intellectuals. The Cuban embargo imposed by the USA in February 1962 led to the transfer of touristic and casino enterprises to the Bahamas colony. Investors and tourists from the USA have taken advantage of the proximity to the USA. Another aspect of the economic benefits of geography is the lack of petroleum deposits and minerals such as gold and diamonds. Countries classified as developing or emerging with these generally have not been able to have stable and prosperous economies. Additionally, the country's historical amicable relationships with the former colonizer Britain and its allies in North America and Europe, and its willingness to adhere, at least verbally, to their, quote, international standards and regimes have avoided hostile economic incursions, except for the blacklisting saga that we're going through now. This Arthur Lewis model of economic development follows the classical economic theory. This model assumes a lack of domestic capital, innovation, skills, and enterprise to advance the economy adequately. It proposes industrialization by invitation, where compliant domestic labor bolsters foreign investors' profitability. Finally, notwithstanding the intensified investments in social infrastructure by the 1967 majority rule government and others, the country announced to the world that the essentials of the economic infrastructure would not be altered, except that job opportunities had to be opened up to Bahamians, especially black Bahamians. Countries that have declared economic political policies such as democratic socialism and the like have not prospered economically, as has the Bahamas. So this is the outline that I will be following. So let's start with the 19th century and start with the labor and wage systems. Slavery, apprenticeship, sharecropping, freed persons, and liberated Africans were the principal labor systems during this century, while the non-wage credit and truck systems were the primary mechanisms for paying labor. The Abolition of Slavery Act 1833 congealed the demarcations between former enslaved persons and their former enslavers. For example, formerly enslaved persons were required to work a period of apprenticeship, essentially as indentured labor, under their former masters until 1838. Wages were paid primarily in the form of food, clothing, and medical care. At the same time, the former masters received a total compensation of 126,848.7 pounds, which equates in today's dollar, to 2023 dollars, using the inflation rate, to 21,094,086.21 pounds for over 10,000 enslaved persons. Furthermore, the liberated Africans, freed and emancipated enslaved persons, generally found it difficult to own land because of its cost, and many lived and farmed on squatted land. Liberated African families were granted land for their use. The Bahamas colony was quite poor relative to other British colonies in the hemisphere, such as Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, which had large, economically successful plantations. The economy, however, was somewhat diversified. The main industries were agriculture, tourism, salt raking, sponging, boat building, wrecking, blockade running. The population and activities were less concentrated in New Providence than it is today. In the early 19th century, Cat Island led the colony in animal husbandry and Eleuthera in fruits and vegetables. The colony produced oranges, grapefruits, pineapples, and cotton for local consumption as well as for export. The foremost labor system were enslavement, apprenticeship, self-hire, and share. Although enslavement is not really a labor system, insofar as enslaved persons were not legally persons, and there was no exchange for work and compensation. Work was carried out nonetheless, and enslaved persons were provided with food and shelter. For Africans, those, quote, liberated from slave ships on the high seas by the British, a period of apprenticeship was similarly required after the so-called abolition of slavery. Payment of wages was not required. During slavery, enslavers would allow their property, i.e. the enslaved persons, to work elsewhere to help with their upkeep. This was called the self-hire system. The share system was that workers owned shares in their endeavors, for example, agriculture and on fishing vessels, and were paid accordingly, except that their shares were usually paid not in money but in kind or as credit from a designated store, and they had no say in valuing their shares. This is the infamous credit and truck system. So the main economic activities. 1861 to 1865 was the American Civil War, and this presented opportunities for blockade running, resulting in an economic boom. The value of trade grew 25-fold. Visitor arrivals, profits, and wages rose, and there was no unemployment. But as soon as the end of the war, the economy returned to its usual depressed state. The dearth of lighthouses presented opportunities for enterprising Bahamians as vessels ran aground on the many uncharted reefs and were wrecked. Their contents were salvaged by the Bahamians. By the mid-19th century, wrecking accounted for at least half of the colony's imports. The most extensive salt harvesting was done in Turks and Caicos, a part of the colony, until 1848. It later was replaced by Inagua as the top producer. However, other islands, Exuma, Rose Island, Rum Key, Long Island, and Long Key, also were active in this industry. Sponging was a boon for the economy. Sponges were first exported in 1841, and in the latter part of the 19th century, it became the most lucrative industry in the colony. Further, because of their skills, Bahamian spongers were enticed to migrate to Florida to establish their sponging industry. The islands most prominent in this enterprise were Abaco, Acklins, Andros, Bimini, Exuma, and Long Island. The Greeks arrived around 1870s to dominate, and they ended up dominating the industry. With the establishment of the sponge exchange, spongers were legally required to sell their sponges on this exchange. This ensured the dominance of the Greeks and local white elite over the industry, as spongers could no longer sell their catch directly to the foreign buyers, where they would receive much better returns. The ground for the tourism industry was fertilized mostly by external events, such as the American Civil War. Advances in steamship building, the introduction of travel brokers also assisted. However, deliberate action to entice steamships and hoteliers were taken through legislation. 1851 legislation was passed to offer money incentives to steamships to ply between Nassau and New York. It was not until 8 years later, however, when the incentive was trebled and the offer was taken up. Additionally, the Royal Victoria Hotel, government-built and completed in 1861, was a significant contributor to the industry. In 1898, Henry Flagler was allowed to purchase the Royal Victoria, build the British Colonial Hotel, and have regular steamship service from Florida. To an extent, the tourism industry was a bit diversified insofar as private homes were used to accommodate tourists because of insufficient hotel rooms, and visitors of African descent were not welcome in the hotels. In summary, the 19th century economy was somewhat diversified, unequal with respect to economic opportunities, highly influenced by external forces, dependent on foreign capital, and very much segregated. Now to the 20th century. For the Bahamas colony, the 20th century began and continued on the foundation of the 19th century, but was less diversified as agriculture faltered because of tariffs by the U.S. to protect its industry and lack of domestic investment and innovation in the industry. Further, a large percentage of the population was landless. The 19th century was a tilling of the soil for income and wealth inequality. The 20th century was a fertilizing of the soil. Tourism. Firstly, through deliberate and concerted public investment in the tourism industry, for example, the Hotel and Steamship Services Act 1913, investors were incentivized to provide hotel accommodations and steamship services, mail and passenger and freight services. The same year, legislation was passed to allow for the duty-free importation of construction materials for hotels and manufacturing. The Development Board Act of 1914 set the vision and future of the tourism-based colony. From 1917 to 1950, the percentage of the overall budget expenditures to the Development Board rose from 2.1% to 9.5%. Jumping to the 1970s, the Bahamas Hotel Corporation, formed in 1974, acquired the following hotels: the Ambassador Beach, Emerald Beach, Balmoral Beach, Lucayan Harbor hotels. And many of you would not even know what these hotels are, but that was the Cable Beach Strip. Also, the corporation spent an estimated $100 million to build the Cable Beach Hotel and Casino, which opened in 1984. In the Family Islands, the corporation also built the Lighthouse Beach Hotel and Marina in Central Andros and renovated the Las Palmas Hotel in South Andros. The active financial public investment in the industry continues as the corporation purchased the Grand Lucayan Resort in Grand Bahama in 2018. Agriculture and fisheries. The second aspect of the Bahamas colony's design was through the neglect of agriculture and fisheries. While the Agricultural Board was also established in 1913, as was the Development Board, in 1930, the Colonial Secretary wrote that there was, and I quote, no concrete scheme to achieve its mandate. Moreover, farmers were not being compensated monetarily. They left the colony to work in the USA because they would be paid in cash. The emphasis on tourism exacerbated the decline in agriculture. Also, farmers left the outer islands hoping to receive wages in the tourism industry in Nassau. In 1948, the combined agriculture and marine boards received 1% of total public expenditure. And the Colonial Secretary's report during that time stated, quote, one can, of course, say that the tourist traffic definitely brings money into the country and certain opportunities for wage earning. But, unfortunately, the mass of the people derive only a small share of the profits of this traffic. The hotels even bring from the United States their staff of servants and their supplies, including even fresh fish. One might expect that the tourist traffic would create a lively trade in farm and garden products, but in fact results mainly in a larger importation of foodstuffs. Taxation. The third attribute of the colony's design is the taxation regime. This ensured income and wealth inequality in favor of merchants and foreign investors. Recall that the controllers of the political economic framework of the colony during the early days of the 20th century were merchants, meaning that the importation of goods was their primary source of income, not agriculture, not manufacturing. Customs duties allowed merchants to essentially become tax collectors, as they could include customs duties as a cost of doing business, and as a cost, place their mark upon it and recover the cost from their customers. This form of taxation is insidious because those paying it do not realize they are paying it. More significantly, this tax ensures high prices and a high cost of living. resulting in limited ability to save and invest. Moreover, it places the more significant financial burden of maintaining society on those with lower incomes and wealth. In 1953, in The Way Forward, the Progressive Liberal Party's platform addressed this predicament, and I quote, "The PLP sincerely believes that the current method of indirect taxation, whereby the bulk of revenue is raised by customs duties, is both unjust and inequitable. We believe that a carefully planned and properly devised system of direct taxation could and should be introduced to correct this injustice. We believe that a system whereby a man is asked to contribute according to his ability is far more beneficial to the Bahamas than the current system. All major countries in the world subscribe to this principle of political economy. It is therefore our pledge to embrace the opportunities of various direct methods of taxation and to explore fully and then introduce at the proper time a system of income tax that will relieve the poor man of some of its burdens and guarantee their fair returns and profits for industry and private investors." So, over 60 years later, in 2015, quote, "As part of a broader reform of the tax system," end quote, value-added tax, another indirect regressive tax was introduced and is paid on top of customs duties. The evidence is that the wealthy spend less proportionately on consumption than low-income individuals. Hence, consumption taxes inevitably are a greater burden on low-income than on high-income individuals. Further, the country continues to have a ceiling on real property tax. This favors the very wealthy and continues the regressive and oppressive tax regime. For example, a $40 million residential property will pay $50,000 in real property tax, a rate of 0.125%. In contrast, real property tax on a $600,000 home would be 0% on the first 300,000, 0.625% on 200,000, and 1% on the rest, 100,000. An effective tax rate of 0.375%. In May 2023, the government introduced the Green Paper on Corporate Income Tax Strategies for the Bahamas. This is a follow-through with its agreement in 2021 with 137 other countries to comply with the OECD initiative to reform international tax rules. It is expected to enhance tax revenues by an additional $145 million annually. Additionally, the government is desirous of moving away from the current business license fee framework based on revenues to a profit-based calculation. As is usual with these initiatives, their origins originate from elsewhere. Notwithstanding, the central bank shows that between 2012 and 2022, payments of approximately $5.6 billion of investment income left the country. Of course, the country is a tax haven and guarantees no taxes on income or capital gains. Next, opportunities. Fourthly, the opportunistic and enterprising nature of taking advantage of external situations continued into the 20th century. One example is bootlegging during the Prohibition in USA, 1919 to 1933. The economic boom delayed and lessened the effects of the Great Depression. The public revenues from these activities were used for public infrastructure, and private wealth went to the sky. Another example of the opportunistic nature of Bahamians is that hoteliers and casinos needed an alternative venue away from USA law after the Cuban Revolution. The Bahamas was most welcoming. In 1963, Wallace Groves and his partner, Louis Chesler, formed the Grand Bahama Amusement Company to operate a casino in Freeport. Enabled by Sir Stafford Sands, a certificate of exemption from the gambling legislation was acquired after consulting arrangements were made with influential Bahamian officials, and I quote, including Sir Roland Simonette, leader of the government in the House of Assembly and member of the Executive Council, Dr. William Sawyer, also on the Executive Council and the Assembly, and the owner of the only racetrack in New Providence Island, R.H. Simonette, Speaker of the Assembly and owner of Nassau Your Haven, as well as other businesses, F.W. Brown, another Assembly member, Charles Trevor Kelly, a member of the Executive Council and president of Green Acres Limited, a shipping company, Sir Edian Depuch, owner of the influential Nassau Daily Tribune, and finally, Sir Edian's son, Eugene, leader of the loyal opposition. Note also that Sir Stafford Sands, a member of the Port Authority Company, was hired as an attorney and public relations officer to secure the certificate and received a fee of over $5 million. At the same time, he headed the development board, the department responsible for promoting tourism. Another example of an economic boom that came about as opportunity presented itself was the drug trade of the late 1970s into the 80s, which significantly contributed to keeping the economy afloat during the oil crises and world recessions of the time. Additionally, the oil crisis of the 1970s was responsible for the massive expansion of the offshore financial industry in the country. The country's first offshore financial institution was established in 1936, the Bahamas General Trust Company, which after several iterations became Coots & Co. The Bahamas' tax haven status, that is, no taxes on income and wealth, along with its location outside the territories of those seeking to hide their income and wealth, bind secrecy, common law legal system, political and economic stability, time zone, and no exchange controls on net non-residents were the attractions. Post-World War II, the industry thrived on Eurodollars, that is, dollars primarily from Europe seeking to escape domestic scrutiny. With the oil shocks of the 1970s, petrodollars sought havens for the same reason. However, the expose, also known as the Bahamas Leaks by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists in 2016, provided information on more than 175,000 companies, trusts, and foundations registered in the Bahamas, resulting in the Bahamas' blacklisting by the European Union and the continuing saga of lists that the Bahamas is placed on by the EU and the OECD and France. And it's a catastrophic blow to the industry from which we are still trying to recover. Land holdings. The fifth feature of the colony's economic model relates to land. The pioneer and chief land salesman to non-Bahamians was Sir Harold G. Christie. He was responsible for attracting Harry Oaks in 1936, for which this part of the island is called Oaksfield. He acquired 10,000 acres in New Providence, a fifth of the island. He provided much needed employment and paid better than the established wage rate. This, though, was vested by the Hawksbill Creek Agreement of 1955. Overseen by Sir Stafford Sands, it included the grant of 50,000 acres, 80 square miles of land, and tax and other concessions, with the added favor of suspending certain immigration laws for individuals connected to Wallace Groves' business. In return for this largesse, Groves was to build an industrial and government complex as well as a medical facility. There have been a number of updates to this agreement that essentially ensconces a private company to govern Freeport's economy. Groves' citing for tax fraud by the USA Congress and his prison time for mail fraud were immaterial. It is claimed that during the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Bay Street Boys held 80% of the non-taxable land in New Providence. The Quieting Titles Act 1959 facilitated nefarious claims and dispossessed many from land occupied by families for generations. To stave off the rising price of land, and as part of its Bahamianization policy, the government passed the Immovable Properties Act in 1981, which severely restricted the sale of Bahamian land to foreigners. This act was repealed in 1993, and Bahamians were again in direct competition for Bahamian land by non-Bahamians throughout the world. Enclaves such as Life Key, Old Fort Bay, Albany, ownership of islands and portions of islands by super wealthy individuals and corporations continue as a primary focus of the country's economic advancement. Reportedly, the notorious Sam Bankman-Fried's apartment in Albany was valued at around $40 million. It's also reported that his company, FTX, bought 35 properties together valued at $300 million. The implications for economy, as described above, and similar activities are a high-income country with a per capita GDP, according to the IMF's April 2023 forecast of $35,460 in current prices. However, with consistent and persistently high unemployment rates, further, according to the Governor General in the recent speech from the throne, I quote, "The Bahamas remains among the top 10 most expensive countries in the world." To put the cost of living in perspective, the global economy.com, using World Bank International comparison data for 2017, outside of Bermuda and Barbados, the Bahamas has the highest cost of living in Latin America and the Caribbean. The other countries with higher costs of living are Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, Australia, Iceland, Israel, and New Zealand. The Bahamas' cost of living is 174% higher than Kenya, 78% higher than Trinidad and Tobago, 41% higher than Singapore, and 38% higher than Hong Kong. The minimum wage for the Bahamas is $260 a week. The World Data.info, in their comparison of worldwide cost of living for 2022, ranks the Bahamas 12th highest in the world, using a purchasing power index with the USA as the base. So, for example, Ireland's cost of living is 20.1% higher than the USA's, with an average monthly income of $6,756, and its purchasing power index is 96, meaning that the Irish can purchase 4% less than the Americans. According to this source's calculations, the Bahamas' purchasing power index, is 39. Bahamians can purchase 61% less than Americans based on their income. Should also be noted that the minimum wage that we have places those persons in lower middle income classification, not as part of high income country. Now, as regards unemployment, as stated earlier, the most recent official rate is 8.8%. However, by adding the discouraged workers, this figure rises to around 10%. The International Labour Organization, ILO, defines unemployment as that share of labor force that is without work but available for and seeking employment, and that the unemployment rate reflects the inability of an economy to generate employment for those persons who want to work but are not doing so, even though they are available for employment and actively seeking work. Using World Bank data, the average unemployment rate for the Bahamas between 2013 and 2019 was 12.1%. There have not been many years in the nation's history when the unemployment rate was below 10%. Moreover, the unemployment rate is a calculation in time, reflecting any work performed for wages during the reference period, giving no account of the nature of the work or the remuneration received, or whether the workers are in jobs commensurate with their experience, skills, and academic qualifications. As regards the high per capita GDP, the GDP measures the money value of production in the economy, nothing more, nothing less. It does not distinguish between the production of illegal activities that flow into the mainstream and legal activities. Doesn't care who is producing, how production is taking place. The per capita GDP is an average of this dollar value divided by the population. The per capita GDP masks income and economic inequalities. To illustrate, if we have a two-person economy and one producing $1 million and the other less than $1, the per capita GDP is $500,000. The World Inequality Index database calculates that for the Bahamas in 2018, the net personal wealth of the top 10% was 61.6% of total wealth, and the bottom 50% got 4.3% of the total wealth. The per capita GDP is somewhat reflected in the country's Human Development Index of 0.812, which is pretty high. We rank 55th of 190 countries surveyed by the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. However, Trinidad and Tobago's per capita GDP is 42.1% lower than the Bahamas', yet it has an HDI, Human Development Index, of 0.81, ranking 57th. The other Caribbean countries, the difference in their HDI to the Bahamas is much less than their relative per capita GDP. And you see this table shows the Bahamas' position, its rank, and you see the per capita GDP of selected countries from the region. You look at their per capita GDP, you look at their HDI, and you're saying, well, relative to the Bahamas, they should be a lot lower. Similarly, the Bahamas' GDP per capita is not commensurate with its HDI compared to similar high-income countries. So these are selected high-income countries. And you see, yes, we have a pretty good HDI, but relative to other countries, our index is still low. relatively speaking. So, to summarize, and I know you're happy, no doubt public policies, especially since 1967 into the 1980s, opened doors and provided greater access to economic opportunities for the broader spectrum of Bahamians. Today, the country's local economic elite comprises persons of varied ethnicities and backgrounds. Notwithstanding, at its core, the economic infrastructure has not changed since the late 19th century. Notwithstanding the vagaries of negative natural phenomena and international economic systems, the Bahamas has maintained a relatively stable, high-income economy, in no small measure because of government support of the economic model, which has produced and maintains a high income, although with a high level of income and wealth inequality. This presentation doesn't address social issues such as quality of education, healthcare, relatively high crime and incarceration rates, alcoholism, and non-communicable diseases, and their inextricable interrelations with the economy. Economics is the study of the production of goods and services, what is produced, how it's produced, and for whom. It is the study of the economy's capacity to provide for society. And I'm going to leave with two questions. How well is our high-income economy providing for our society? Is it satisfactory to have a successful economy without a successful society? Thank you. They ready to go home?
First question is, can you speak it loud enough so our audience in Facebook land can hear the question? First question, please. I see the hand over there. Any questions?
Ah. I think it's too late. Yeah. Well, for me, the main thing about us competing for land with the super rich and famous is that we have firstly a false sense of our wealth insofar as our property value inevitably goes up because there's only so much land, and you have people coming bidding for the land. Many Bahamians are selling off their land because of the high prices they can get. But then at the same time, the money runs out eventually. And your children and grandchildren are going to have a very difficult time finding land that they could afford because the prices have been rising and rising and rising. Because what happens is that we've sold so much land, so many of our islands, that now we don't even see the transaction money because it's between a wealthy person in New York and a wealthy person in Dubai or that kind of way. Yeah. So I think it's a bit late because in order for us to reclaim that land, it means we have to buy it. Well, I think it like I said, for those of us, Yeah, they're going to have a very difficult time being able to afford land. And what that means, not just by being able to purchase land for their homes, but even rent will go up. Because, that's inevitable. And so the cost of living is only going to go up more and more. And the minimum wage is not related in any way to the cost of living. And when you look at our wages, although we say that per capita GDP is 30-odd thousand, that's not the median wage. That is simply an average of the value of production in the economy. That is different from the wage that people actually receive. I mean, many of you work, you have families, and you know, a lot of people who do not make $30,000. Correct? Even for the jobs you expect to get when you finish UB, not many of them are going to be in the $30,000 range. No, I didn't say that. No, I said that they're considering introducing a corporate income tax. I support income and wealth tax. It's more equitable. It's a direct tax. It's not insidious like customs duties where you think you're not paying a tax, but you are in fact, you see, and you may become a better citizen because you say the government is pulling this amount of money out of my salary. I want to see them do something with it. And most countries with income taxes and wealth taxes, there's a floor by which persons below would not pay income tax. But in our context, income tax to me is it should be introduced, but I think we should consider wealth tax. I think if you have people who are able to come into this country and, like I said, hundreds of millions of dollars every year, they're taking out income that they earn because they're here, and it's all tax-free. Some people may say, well, maybe those people need to sit down and think a bit more about their economic model. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. The minimum wage has nothing to do with anything. It just says this is the lowest. It's not related to the cost of living. It's not related to anything. It's just saying people mustn't earn less than this. If we look, like I said, other countries with the so-called per capita GDP of ours, and you look at their minimum wage, you'll see it's very different. It's a lot higher. And that's because their economies have more internally generated economic activity than ours. We sit back and wait for people to come and invest in us to save us. And we're not really generating locally and innovating in our economy to produce income commensurate really with this per capita GDP. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, ma'am. Like I said, our economy is built on other people coming in, as opposed to us deciding what kind of society and economy we want, and going about building that economy and society. And we have, and sadly, our education system, you be included, continues to educate for graduates to be employees. Not innovators, not creative thinkers, not entrepreneurs. Yeah, so often we'll have a little this and a little that seminar, but we're not serious. Yes? Well, we have to start with ourselves. And for example, we have to become active learners. We have to become very inquisitive. We have to be desirous of a society and economy that is suited for us. And in our own individual spaces, go about trying to achieve those things. I don't think this model is going to be very effective for very much longer. The whole world is changing. We have a lot of, like everybody here is on their cell phone, and but how much of the innovation of the cell phone derives from us? I mean, the fact that we've been in since the late 19th century in the hospitality industry, Bahamians don't own one major hotel. Well, we just had a little something down in Olivea. That's the first, but here it is. It's the 21st century. And we're bragging that Bahamians own a major resort. So that tells you something about a psychology of the economy that relegates us to work in these institutions, not to own them, not to operate them, not to be able to build them, not to be able to amass the capital to get them. And even when we bring in the foreign investors, we don't say, well, X% must be owned by Bahamians so that we share in the profits. We just say, you don't have to pay any tax. We'll give you this incentive, this duty-free this next thing, that. And our people will be happy with the jobs. Well, our economy always had high unemployment rates. Initially, we had high, it was seasonal, and then with the expansion of tourism industry, we had employment spread over a bit. But what's happening in the global context with technology and the way people are doing business, unemployment rates are skyrocketing around the world. So for us, however, we always had high unemployment rates because our economy never was able to provide the opportunities for those who wanted to work, who were not working. That's called the dual economy model. And that was because we didn't have the internally generated economic activity sufficient. We were relying on the hospitality industry, which is not as labor intensive as it needs to be to provide the employment that we would like. And that's why we also have a high public sector, because that was also a way to take in some of the workforce. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. I don't, Bermuda income is almost four times more. Per capita GDP is almost four times as much as ours. like us, they import, and that's one of the major factors contributing to the high cost of living for the Bahamas and for we all small, and for us, if you were to take out the 35% average customs duties, you can imagine how prices would fall. But we are so reliant on the customs duties now, we would dare remove them because the public revenue would fall. But the size of the economy and the reliance on imports is a major contributing factor for high cost of living. Anywhere in the world, you find the government subsidize agriculture tremendously. We've never seen, we fail, we'll just buy it from somebody else. Yes, sir. I can't predict what will happen if we did something. But the theory says exactly that. However, the practice has shown, depending on how you raise the minimum wage, it could in fact increase employment because now you can demand more from persons in terms of their productivity. For us in the Bahamas, though, the minimum wage primarily affects those in what I call the domestic part of the economy, not the foreign sector part of the economy. And the average Bahamian small business would find it very difficult to pay a livable wage because they're living on the edge. The profitability isn't, for the average, isn't that good. No. So if you're running away from a country that's charging you a 60% income tax, and you come to the Bahamas and your income tax is only 15%. So yes, there could possibly be negatives. People say now that they're charged, you have to pay income and wealth tax. We're going to leave, but persons are weighing the benefits and costs. To be here, they're now paying zero. So if we added 5, added 10, added 15, we'd be raising revenue more than we had before. And particularly as regards to wealth, because you purchase or land, and one of the reasons given, for example, for the repeal of the Movable Properties Act in 1993 was that it was to encourage second home owners. Now, if you really think about that as an economic pursuit, what you're saying is we want people to come in to buy our land, to build houses. And then after the house is built, then what? We need some landscaping done. We need some people to keep the house. We may buy a car, that sort of thing. And what actually happened, though, was that those successful homes were really business enterprises. And, Airbnb is a popular thing now, but persons have been doing that for decades and decades, except that it wasn't us doing it. It was the very wealthy. And we had no access to taxing those revenues. In addition, you hear some people $10,000 a night to be on one island. And the value of that island is some X billion, and their real property tax is $3,000. So the economic model has to change. I would say the debt situation is such that it's forcing us to rethink. And it's going to push us to do things differently. The challenge is that traditionally we are very risk averse. And that's one of the reasons why our economic model has persisted, is because we're not willing to take risks. We like the safety of somebody else coming in, bringing in money, putting up their hotel, putting up this, putting up that. And we're not willing to really take the risk. Or wait for the ship to wreck on the reef when we go and get it. There's not much risk in that. But we have to change our mindset to being more risk-taking. If we're really serious about a future for you guys in the country. Oh. Well, every country is suffering from what they call the supply chain issues from the war in Ukraine. But we also see it when hurricanes hit Florida. We have issues with goods and prices of goods that we bring in. The challenge for us is it takes a while for a coconut tree to grow. But you have to start at some point. And even though we can't turn on a dime, at some point we have to start a journey towards a different kind of economic model. And so my answer is a non-answer, really. But at some point, you have to make a decision. Do we want to continue on this path, or do we want a different kind of Bahamas? A Bahamas that is designed for the benefit and well-being of Bahamians and its residents. Yes. Well, I think I need to clarify. The Movable Properties Act did work insofar as the access to Bahamian land was limited, extremely limited. And for the most part, I think we could say it was adhered to. The Bahamianization policy also for a while was adhered to. However, in 1993, the Movable Properties Act was repealed. In fact, repealed. It no longer applied. So the idea of us perfecting what we already have is a good point for discussion. However, in my presentation, as I was showing how the Bahamian economic model works and its facilitation by the government, I trust that you got the corruption that's also inherent in our economic model, insofar as persons of political positions and socio-economic positions are able to influence certain things that happen. And further, we all know that rules apply for some and not for others. So it's a big picture. There's no silver bullet that's going to magically cause us to. We have to decide, I'm not going to participate in these kinds of activities anymore, or I'm going to act with integrity, as difficult as it is sometimes. And a simple thing like with students, I'm not going to cheat. I mean, because if you're cheating here to get a couple points, when you go out into the world, let's say you become an accountant, a lawyer, somebody with influence, you would have honed your capacity to cheat and do corrupt things for your benefit. We upset usually because other people are doing it. We want to do it, if we really want to be honest with ourselves. And all of this is a part of the economic model where people who come in, what do you say, kisses go by favor. And so some people get a license because they know this person or did this thing, and not because these are the steps that should be taken. And that we cannot avoid that fact about us. The drug trade thrived because the population at large, to a large extent, participated in the drug trade one way or the other. We knew somebody who was in the drug trade, and they bought this car, they gave me this gift, and on. We may not have been actively on the plane transporting, but the country at large participated and benefited and suffered from the drug trade. Last. Well, as I said in my presentation, this strategy, and someone from the ministry, former governor, Wendy Craig, is going to be coming, and I'm sure she's going to be talking a bit about that, is to have the debt-to-GDP ratio down to 65% by 2027. And I also showed how the United Nations lauded the Bahamas for its management of the debt. And I have to, over the years, the Bahamian governments have been able to maintain through fiscal and monetary policy a stable economy, meaning that we've been pretty conservative and we've been pretty acute in how we've managed the economy. And so we're at a state that I think a decade ago, 15 years ago, we thought we'd never be in. But things happen, and the world, certain things in the world are beyond our control. Natural events are outside of our control. But nonetheless, and even though we could complain and we could say, well, they're wasting money here, wasting money there, when you look at the big and broad picture, the Bahamian economy has been well managed from a fiscal and monetary perspective. And I'm sure that barring any serious external event, we'll be able to come out of this situation that we're in. Last. How many last? Yes. Okay.
Good evening again. Ladies and gentlemen, could we show our appreciation again to Dr. Saunders for well-researched, very informative presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Saunders. So I want to thank Dr. Saunders for her well-researched, well-informed presentation. And I want to thank you, the students, for coming out and being so patient. And of course, in the final analysis, we benefited. Just think of the amount of wonderful knowledge that now you are able to boast about having now obtained. So I want to thank you once again for coming on behalf of the College of the Bahamas School of Business, the Banking, Economic Finance Department, and the women in economics who really make the country rock. Right? We female economists, we rock. Right, Dr. Saunders? Okay. So once again, thank you very much for coming, and look forward to seeing you again at our second presentation scheduled for November 7th. Thank you once again.